Hi, hello, and howdy, and welcome to Home Age Conversations, a podcast about the residents. Today, your hosting huddled masses consist of me, Mole, a clown philosopher.
I am Rabbit. I don't really know much about myself.
I am Cap. I am a gossip who teases the dead.
And I'm Mewy. I teach cursed stones how to think.
Alright, so today we're talking about Eskimo, right?
Yes.
Yes.
As far as I'm aware.
And Eskimo was put out in 1979, despite, all the forces of the world seemingly trying to prevent it from ever appearing.
God said no, please. God tried to prevent the residents from obtaining the terrible amounts of power they were destined to accrue.
And have accrued. Rabbit, do you want to kind of, tell us about this, please?
Yeah, I'm going to try to explain it in the simplest way I can because I have a weird way of wording things. So Eskimo is technically world music, only sort of because of the fact that, it's based around the Inuits, which were real people. I may have said that wrong.
No, I think you got it.
Okay, good. It's based around Inuit tribe in the Arctic, but they have some, very interesting practices, and they have a way different language, which is made up by commercial slogans and jingles, which is basically it.
Yeah, and I think what that has to do with is that it's a pop perception of these northern indigenous cultures, because the residents were not, I don't think they were exactly trying to depict how they viewed these cultures, but more how, I guess American culture or commercial culture looked at these things. So I guess that just about covers the basic concept, so I guess we can move on to the origins. Miwi, want to take it from here?
So the residents started off making Eskimo because they wanted to sort of start making world music before world music really became a thing. And they kind of settled on the Arctic because they thought, hey, this isn't a culture that's been exploited heavily yet.
Let's kick off that process right quick.
Yeah, it was never really paid attention to because they forgot the Arctic existed.
Too much ice.
I mean, too much ice. If it's ice, the residents can't see it. That I've heard that's one of the origins of it, but there's also the fact that some Bavarian dude named Ensenada, who sort of hung around in his trench coat with a saxophone and whatnot, sent them, usual stuff.
With the
sent
fedora.
them fedora, always.
Yeah, this is how everyone in the 70s was, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, except he had a very thick accent. Or maybe he didn't. But he apparently sent them a jar of Arctic air, or some say it was Inuit field recordings, and he sent those to the residents, and it just hit them like a ton of tar. This is what they're gonna do, as the subject of their world music endeavors. And Ensenada's kind of an interesting figure, to say the least. So, Ensenada, he did a lot of stuff, but if you're familiar with the turn of phrase, the theory of obscurity, that's him. And the theory of obscurity stated that artists do their purest and best work in obscurity, but his lesser-known theory was the theory of phonetic organization, which apparently has a lot more to do with this album than the theory of obscurity does. And the theory of phonetic organization states that music should be built up from the sounds first and foremost, and then music comes in being built upon it, instead of having the music as a base and adding the sounds afterwards. And I think that's probably the origin of the made-up language that the residents use for the Inuit tribe in the album. Because
making sounds.
Yeah, and organizing the sound of the speech based on how it sounds rather than meaning.
And you can hear this in a lot of like earlier Resonance work, especially where the lyrics themselves don't really have any inherent meaning. They're just sort of there for sound. But you can especially hear it in Eskimo.
Yeah, they don't really make much sense. Like there's like especially duck stab and stuff like that, and fingerprints as well. So there's just a lot of gibberish, and Eskimo's basically the whole album made out of that.
Yeah, so that's a little bit about Ensenada, but his whole his whole deal with the Residents is kind of a lot to get into, so we're going to steer away from that.
For the time being, at least.
Yeah, back into another avenue of potential inspiration for this album, which was that they were looking for some kind of culture to pay attention to, and the thing that brought them to the Arctic, well, thematically at least, because they were still definitely in San Francisco, was seeing a Coca-Cola ad with Santa on it. Yeah, they saw a Coca-Cola ad with Santa on it, and that's when they remembered the Arctic. It was a brilliant moment of revelation, I guess, to see Santa, enjoying his favorite taste of the holidays or whatever. So, I guess, yeah, there's just a bunch of stories about how this album came to exist. Who are we to say what's the truth here?
My personal favorite is the Coca-Cola one, if only because I, too, am inspired to do almost everything I do by or for an ice-cold Coca-Cola.
You and that brown drink.
I love Coke. Well, Coca-Cola, specifically.
My favorite story is the one with Ensenada sending them a jar of air.
Yeah, I like to imagine that it was still cold when they opened it.
Exactly. Like, I imagine them opening this, like, corked bottle, and the cold air just rushes out and envelops them all.
It, like, freezes the inside of their studio, and they're slipping around.
Get all scared.
It's like you got, like, Snake, he gets the mail for them, and he brings it in. And he opens it, and, like, he just gets blasted in the face, and there's, like, frost on his face, and that's what... So he stopped working with the Residents for like a year until the commercial album.
It's very like Vonnegut-esque. Like Ensenada just sends them a little vial of Ice 9 and it freezes all of San Francisco. And so they make a soundtrack to it. Is it time to address the elephant in the room?
What elephant? What room? This hypothetical room we're all sitting in?
Yes.
The eyeballs.
Oh, man.
Yes.
Oh, man.
Oh, those fellas. Those sweet little guys.
They're cute.
Yeah, they are absolutely adorable.
I love them.
The wee balls.
Miwi, you love the eyeballs. Here, I'm handing this off to you.
All right, so back in the day, the Residents, for every album basically, as they're known as the Residents anyway, they wanted to have a new disguise, a new costume, so they were always changing. And for Eskimo, they decided first on these giant silver globes,
kind of like Christmas ornaments.
Yeah, they're really weird and abstract. Like they were very fever dreamish, almost.
Yeah, because if you looked at one, you'd probably be thinking, like, "What the hell is that? Is that me?"
Exactly. They were a lot more abstract than the eyeballs, but they were not practical at all.
Not practical to the point that they couldn't even get made.
Exactly.
Yeah, because they were calling around, and the people, every one of the people who they were in works with them, they said, like, you can't make these.
You can't breathe in these. You can't see. You can't hear. There's no way to see in or out. It's just kind of like a nightmare.
It's just a little bit. I'm a big fan of seeing and breathing.
The Silver Globes, they definitely weren't working. So I think they kind of tossed ideas around for a little bit, and then eventually they landed on the eyeballs, right?
Yes, because I remember in that whole process of like trying to figure out what are we gonna do. One of them just drew out eyeball with a top hat on.
And that was it. Like, that was it right then and there. But I don't think it was actually for the album cover, because that was for their hit t-shirt. Like, they had this, like, a photo of, I guess, someone, not necessarily a resident, who's to say, wearing the eyeball with the tuxedo and whatnot, and that t-shirt is still, that's, like, probably their number one selling item. And then they took a photo with all four of the residents in the tuxedos and all those costumes standing in front of the Golden Gate Bridge. And as far as I know, what they did was then kind of cut and pasted assorted elements from those photos to create the album artwork.
The question then becomes,
What does the question become?
We all know the question that must be asked here, people, is despite how much we love them, what did the eyeballs, are they they good or bad?
Oh, it depends on point of view, because like from our point of view, like they're good because we can, like let's say we want to like represent the residents or something, instead of having one of a million things to choose from, we have their icon.
They're sellable. They're very marketable.
They
look
move
cute.
T-shirts.
It's not some gross old man.
I ask only because, the whole theory of obscurity, the whole anonymity of it all, you don't want to tamper with that.
And they barely skimmed under it. I mean, like, it made them famous, but they didn't really reveal anything.
Not to mention how cumbersome they could become.
Oh, yeah.
I think the Cryptic Corporation was definitely grateful for that being something they could sell and something that did well commercially. Something that people could point out and say, that right there, that's the Residents.
That's the Residents.
Yeah.
In Theory of Obscurity, they actually mentioned that Cryptic was kind of pushing to have that as the icon, too.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it sells. But here, I'm gonna pull out my clown philosopher card and propose another question that we have to ask, and it's, what's the cover art saying? Like, what does it mean?
Sometimes you gotta chill with the boys.
Cracking open a cold one in the Arctic with the boys.
It's a cold one, because they're in the Arctic. No!
Trying to crack open a frozen cold one.
I'm going to put out a little proposition here as for my theory of what the cover art's saying about the album. What I think is that the eyeballs and the mirrored globes, they're both reflections. And this is where I think the Residents really start using reflection, as a major theme in their works. And this is even reflected, haha, no pun intended, in the title, Eskimo. Because within the liner notes, they acknowledge the fact that these people are like Inuit cultures. But what they're reflecting, I think, is American perception of outside cultures. So, there's America and then there's the other. And so that's why you have all these commercial slogans and stuff mixed up in there, because from the perspective of commercial culture, that falls into everything else, because they're projecting their own ideas onto sort of this faceless beyond of the Arctic. It's a foreign culture. We don't know what's going on over there, but I think they have similar opinions about Charmin, it's the toilet paper.
Charmin Ultralight?
I guess.
I don't know, that with the pooping bears.
So yeah, I guess it's about projection and reflection there, and pooping bears.
I think in addition to just the eyeballs, the tuxedo and the top hat and their little canes, I think that also, in the context of this album cover, it helps add a little bit of like aloofness to the Residents characters. That gives them, it gives it this extra like, oh, we're observing this culture, this other culture that's alien and weird, and not us sophisticated tuxedo wearing eyeball guys.
They're mocking, Western culture, looking at whatever it deems to be the other. And so just as much as you look at the album cover, it looks back at you, which I think is very effective.
It's also just a really cool image.
Looks really nice.
That's a side point. We've got our little eyeball boys.
Precious. They're cute. They're adorable.
They're so sweet. You just want to cuddle them.
Needful eyes.
Yes.
But I propose we make that they make eyeball top hat plushes. But
yes, please.
I cry.
You hear us down here, Cryptic. You listen to our demands.
I will buy 20.
I would buy every single one of them that they have made.
Okay, so, yeah, I think we just about covered everything there is that isn't.
I have a little bit of a interpretation I'd like to lay down.
Oh, hell yeah, brother.
Hell yeah, brother. I guess in the easy, because it's hard to explain exactly what I mean when I say this, but it's like with them being, eyes, it's like you're now resting your eyes on the whole culture around them, and that culture is looking right back at you, needfully, because it's been trying to get your attention for a long time.
I mean, yeah, I think it's like the content of the album is so absurd and far from anything that could be the truth that it's calling upon the viewer, the listener, to actually take a deeper look and figure out this, to negate the space in between the information the residents present, information in 30 rows of quotes, and the reality. So
it's new.
So as not to spoil the rest of the episode, should we move on to the content of the album?
Why not?
Alright, so here we have the first track. The first track, The Walrus Hunt. So, musically, what a good intro, right?
This track is so iconic for represent when I think Eskimo, I think of that what is it, 6 notes?
Do do do. Yeah, that.
I really like it. It's become iconic not only in Eskimo itself. It's spooky, but also in the mildly, somewhat successful single that was spawned from it, which was Eskimo, because that's the first little thing you hear besides the really rapid beat.
Yeah, it's got kind of a jingle vibe to it, and the way the wind kind of fades it in. It's really,
that wind, huh?
Yeah, it's really cinematic. Oh, and I think it really reinforces that whole thing that I've read here and there. I don't know how true it is, but it says that the residents, a lot of their early work was soundtracks to the movies they couldn't afford to make.
Stop.
Yeah, you like whatever happened to Violence Fats and whatnot.
Yeah, so I think that comes out really strongly in there, and it builds musically too.
You could also say that this technically was a soundtrack to something that they wanted to make, the opera that they wanted to do, that they dropped in favor of the Mole Show.
Yeah.
Not that it was a bad thing. I mean, the Mole Show's great.
Yeah.
Well, it did had its trials and tribulations, naturally. I'm grateful for it. Mole Show, I think, was spectacularly rife with, how should I put this, misfortune, misadventure.
Yeah. Definitely, it was a loss of everything they had at the time, but that's getting a bit off. That's for another episode.
I also like how in the Walrus Hunt that they just hit you right in the face, straight out the gate with the phonetic organization stuff, the chanting. God, there's so much debate to be had about what they're actually saying.
My beloved girlfriend, she is not a res head, as the term goes. So I was visiting her this weekend, and obviously, to gear up for this, I listened to Eskimo a few times. I was listening to the opening track, and she's like, "What the hell is this?" So I'm like, "Oh, it's She's like, "I don't mean it's bad. It's just I don't know what they're saying." And I'm like, "Yeah,
I don't think anybody does.
I don't think they do."
I think they know, but we don't get to find out.
They probably know, but they forgot. Because it's been so long, almost...
immediately afterwards, probably, I would imagine, half the time.
Yeah, they just learn how to say it, and then they forget it.
Yeah, I like to think a lot of it's just one-off, just making noises, and then just out with that.
Going with it.
Yeah.
So it's always interesting hearing from her perspective, because she was like, it's not like it's bad, it's just what's going on. Like, yeah, well... welcome to the show.
I have a similar story to that as that in when we get to one of the later tracks.
Oh boy, I'm excited to find out which. So I think we pretty much covered the the lyrics and music there. So I guess it's probably time to move on to the stories.
I love the stories. I love stories.
Yeah, I think the stories would probably remedy a lot of your girlfriend's concerns, queries.
They probably would.
I like how the stories talk about like the whiteout, because that is totally what it sounds like.
Mm-hmm.
I really like that they fit the whole like theme of just like everything is white with the first vinyl pressing too, because it's really, really clean white.
Yeah,
it's really nice.
As white as driven snow, if you will.
The art direction of the album cover matches the descriptions and also just the music in this album.
The tone.
Really well. It's very like white and just like
white
dark.
And really contrasting, and then
it's very monochromatic almost.
It's got that really faint blue hint to it too.
Yes.
It looks like winter or cold, if that makes sense at all.
Yeah.
And it sounds like winter and cold.
Yeah, some of the some pressings they make them a little more like black and white, and then if you got a picture disc, then it's probably yellow and black. But that's besides the point. That's a rant for another day.
Yeah. So the way the stories are being told in the liner notes is just so fascinating to me, because it's not condescending.
Almost as if it's like written by. It's almost like an academic paper, kind of like you're reading it from a textbook of some sort.
Yeah, but like a wacky textbook from somebody who's already published a bunch of things. Like, this is somebody with tenure.
Or even just, and this, speaking from my perspective as a historian, I suppose you could call me that.
Gossip.
A gossip. You see all these historians, and especially earlier historians, I feel like we've come a long way, but you view these cultures with a kind of xenophobia, or you're like unwilling to see their perspective and unwilling to see them as like, people on your own caliber, because you think you're so above them because you in your culture does this, that, and the other thing. You know what I mean?
You've got like a top hat and a tuxedo.
Because you've got an eyeball for a head. What are these stupid people doing? Still, though, that same time period, you also had a lot of Victorians, British, typically, going into places like Egypt and carving their names and year numbers into the sides of pyramids and tombs and stuff. And I think about this every single time I go to the Met. It's like, well, I'm glad I get to see this, and I'm glad I get to experience this culture, I guess, in my own backyard, so to speak. But what is the morality of this? The fact that these people thought they were entitled to go in and make these judgments and take these things from their place of origin.
And the way the stories are written, it's got kind of a mysticism to it. Like, oh, what are they doing? Oh, that's fantastic. Oh, it's so strange. It's in the same kind of tone that, like, the Discovery Channel or Animal Planet would use.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, for their narrator. And that, like, dehumanization without outwardly calling it bad. It's that they're not taking it from a perspective of these are people.
This is just a strange creature of sorts. This is just an animal.
Yeah.
It is savage.
I like that the walrus hunt story opens up kind of like an instruction manual for Inuits. Like, it says, like, walrus hunting in kayaks among the floating ice must sometime proceed in the winter darkness or in a condition known as whiteout. That sort of thing. It's like telling you, it's telling you, like, this is when this happens.
It's familiarizing you as an outsider with how to navigate this world. Like, that's how deep they're taking you in this. The residents are taking you to the point where they want you to know how to navigate a whiteout.
Yeah, it's also written in a fashion where it's like both, an outsider could read it and understand what's going on, but an Inuit all the same could read it and be like, oh yeah, I'm gonna go hunt some walrus now. That sort of thing.
Again, it's like I said, it's written very textbook-esque. Like a this is the information I have discovered. Feast your eyes upon it and learn, my children.
But there is there still is a definite story-like quality to them all. There's way more details in these stories than like what your textbooks would say. So it still paints a vivid image in your mind along with the music, which I think is a interesting balance of how they do that.
You know, I'm thinking now, like, the residents, they should write out, like, kind of like history books for all these different, like, cultures and stuff they've created. Like, you know, like the moles and chubs and stuff.
Mm.
Yeah.
I think that'd be kind of cool, like a collection of them or something.
Yeah. So, are we ready to move on to birth?
Just one thing I would want to say about the walrus hunt is I like how they started off with probably one of the most like normal, believable-ish stories compared to
they
like,
trick you.
Everything else in this album gets progressively crazier.
I think a good example of that mean trick that they do to anybody with ears is the next track, Birth. Oh, man. Oh, man.
I'll just say this. You know, it goes from, oh, yeah, they hunt walrus to, you know, what it's about to turn into, so...
So musically, I really like the start of Birth. That chanting that they have at the beginning is really, really nice, and that's where they bring in, I think, some instrumentation, if I'm remembering correctly.
I remember. All I know is that this album, especially Birth, it makes me kind of want to, like, listen to it on, like, my phone or something, like, put earbuds and just wander out in the snow.
Yeah,
Trying not to die,
we planned this episode, a while back, and we actually had our first snowfall here, and I was like, this is the time. It's the time to revisit it. And I did, and it was fitting, and it felt right, and I almost went for a walk, and then I decided, I don't want to freeze, and I'd rather lie in bed and listen to it instead.
When we decided it was Eskimo, it was actually the first time snow had landed here, so...
A divine blessing from the god of winter, Mr. Snowmeister, I'd say.
Yeah, I don't get snow, so I just turned up my air conditioning and listened.
People from Arizona don't count.
I did listen to it with a blanket, so...
You have, like, tan snow all over the place, don't worry. And it never melts.
I think, so musically, one thing about in between these tracks is, like, that wind. They don't just use it to introduce the album, but they use it to switch between tracks. That is so interesting. It's like turning the page of a storybook.
It makes it all connected, because it's like, you know, it's kind of hard to make the whole same chant go on and on, but if you just take the atmosphere of, like, what exactly you're in and continue it into the next thing that also happens in that atmosphere, it's like, yeah, it fits.
Listening to the album on vinyl, at least, because if you're listening to it, like, digitally or on CD, there's usually a little tiny gap, but on the vinyl, the songs flow together so well because they end with the wind and start with the wind. So
yeah,
you almost don't notice the next song is starting, besides the fact that there's that wind.
Yeah, they use key change. Really, that's the only way you can tell. Because I know this one, after the walrus hunt, you know, you get that drumming. And it's a totally different mood, even though it's just the sound of some light chanting and some drums.
Yeah, it does so much with so little.
Pleasantly minimalist. It's like you're turning around in a whiteout, and then you take a couple steps forward, and then suddenly you're seeing a scene, and then you take a couple steps back, turn like 2 steps to the left, take 5 steps forward, and it's a totally different story happening over there.
That's a really good metaphor.
Yeah, and that's where birth is happening. But before we get into that, the way you were wording that at first, like, I thought it was gonna be like oh yeah, then there was sound behind me, and I turned around, and there was the infamous Eskimo band, that sort of thing,
playing me sweet sounds of music.
They were playing slow drum things, and
the
chanting.
hills were alive with the sound of.
The glaciers were alive with the sound of birth.
Oh, have mercy.
So, I mean,
the
first half of the song is really something you can play around family and friends.
And then you start hearing the baby.
Yeah. Well, before that, there's that deep chanting from let's see. Yeah, there's the deep chanting, I guess, from the people outside of the igloo. And then it's just pained sounds.
Just basically once the birth starts happening and it becomes an event that people are chanting while the birth is happening, it starts getting much weirder.
Yeah.
What really freaked me out was the first time I listened to it is I thought there was some kind of sacrifice happening too, because it's you hear this person freaking out and then you hear all this chanting and then a baby being born, and it's Jesus Christ.
Yeah, I mean, in the story makes that weirdly make a lot of sense, because it's mentioning how under certain conditions there's sacrifices at birth to meet social needs, and I'm like, okay, sure, right, that's totally what happens. But it really captures the drama. Between the story and the music, you really get caught up in it. It's oh my god. Well, now knowing that there might be a sacrifice, I am leaning all the way in.
Yes.
And on that note, it's again, along the lines of we're talking the perspective of colonialists and outsiders and on cultures that they don't or understand and don't seek to actually understand. We're all familiar with the Aztecs, I think. We're all familiar with the Aztecs.
Yes.
They're dead, though.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, no, sort of.
Sort of, much like any native population, they have been not treated well by the years. In any case, we all have this, or for the most part, Westerners, so to speak, I guess, have this belief that this whole ritualistic sacrifice was so widespread. But historians and historians discovered that it's much less likely that any of that was taking place, and more likely than not, it was this. The Spanish conquistadors being trying to disenfranchise the native population so they could better have excuse to divide and conquer and get rid of that religion.
Disease.
Well, that was kind of a side. I don't think that necessarily was on purpose. The rest of it was, though.
It was kind of. I mean, they gave them blankets, but
I don't think by giving them blankets they were actively thinking, let's spread disease. I don't think they knew how filthy they were.
I might be thinking of another one of the settler, people, but they were the ones that took the blankets from the infected people and they gave them to the.
That I'm not entirely familiar with, but I do.
It might have been another one, actually, now that I think about it.
Human sacrifice was much less of an actual thing, but now there's this common, widespread belief that Aztecs were just, going around ripping hearts out of chest a la Indiana Jones.
Kalima!
If your culture never had big, ruffly collars, they are savages, and they are most definitely sacrificing children for fun or for the gods. And that is fact.
And therefore we need to convert them all to Catholicism, and if they don't, they're witches, and we've got to just demolish them. What's so wrong about being a witch, anyway?
You would not know. What I like about the stories, though, here, is that the residents, instead of taking it in this very, kind of, further down the line of thinking they're taking, instead of going there, they depict it as everything that occurs in these stories and in these cultures as being kind of magical in a very basic human way. Because while they could very easily make birth about, the tragic sacrifice of a child, instead, it's about sort of the mystery of it.
You're like, isn't this amazing? Can you imagine? Can you believe this?
Yeah, can you imagine what it would be like to be anybody in this scenario?
To be this mother, I think they specifically try to put you in the shoes of the mother there.
Yeah.
The hoping you don't want to lose your child.
Yeah, and where they could depict these people as being totally and absolutely lacking in depth. You know, there's this deep sense of caring that they all have for each other, where it's talking about the magic man saying protective prayers for the mother. You know, that's very just baseline human decency right there. And so it creates a pleasant kind of tension in between the language they're using and what they're depicting.
I'm going into the musical territory in the whole thing. I like, because, you know, it's like the Walrus Hunt. It has, like, that catchy little thing that it opens with. And it's a little, it's not, like, as spooky. It's a little more kind of a little more upbeat, you know, for the theme, at least. You know, it's dun, 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 like that whole thing. Like, I like that. It kind of shows, like, this whole thing is very upbeat for them. You know, it's a ceremony. It's not killing a walrus or anything like that. It's more like they're celebrating this person's being born.
It's like, hey, we do that.
It's like, hey, it's just that there's a chance we might have to kill the baby, so...
You know, that makes a nice bit of drama.
Yeah. Yeah, because you know, they... If I'm not mistaken in the story, they never say if it's a male or female.
The only hint we get is they sing a life.
Yeah.
Yeah, somewhere in the lyrics, or from what I can perceive as the lyrics, it sounds optimistic.
Yeah, because in the story they mentioned, like, you know, they're chanting for, like, male, so that was probably what that whole optimistic was. It was like, hey, we hope it's a male.
I do like that vagueness, though, in this story. That it kind of
it lets you kind of decide, like, what happened to that child after they took it away.
Yeah, that, like, vagueness kind of exists throughout the entire album, and I really like that about all the stories, and kind of the music, even.
Because they make it work. I mean, like, it'd be very easy to resolve that mystery, but instead, they take it and they say, well, who knows? Could go either way.
There's a subtlety in this album that really, up to this point in the Residents' career, they never really used before.
Yeah, there's definitely some works preceding this that are sort of lacking in subtlety.
Oh yeah, most of it's, like, so bold that it makes no sense. But yeah, I like the whole vagueness thing to it too. It lets you decide, like, hey, are these people, is this baby going to have a lighter outcome? Is it going to have a darker outcome? Is it going to happen it's female and there is another male, or not? Like, which one do you want?
Yeah, we were never told if that circumstance was met, so for all we know, there could have been a need for a baby girl.
Yeah, and then a baby girl was born and they kept it.
But before you can even think about that, they whisk you away in the wind once again.
Like Dorothy in her house to Oz. Except in this case, Oz is a lot colder.
Alright, so here we have Arctic Hysteria, the next track. Jeez, man. If we thought the Walrus Hunt was spooky. Oh me, oh my, oh man.
Yeah, this one starts off with the just wind, and it's got, like, the plucking of that one instrument. And you just have the singing.
Let me get the name of that for you. Supposedly the koa. The kua. Or
probably.
That's what it says here. Of the instrumentation.
I also have a source that's spelled kua. So
yeah.
Yeah, that thing. A plucked string instrument. So it's got to be that.
It's it's very dissonant, and it sounds dark. For me at least, like the audio of it just imagines me just, you know, some lady out there plucking away in the dark.
Yeah, for this phenomenon that they have to experience. Like,
yeah.
Like, I guess for me, it's just personally, like, kind of more, like, lonely in sounding, because I always have, like, I have kind of, like, a mental soft spot for, like, lone instruments and singing over it in the middle of nothing. So it's just naturally to me, it's like, oh, this is pretty freaky.
Yeah, this track is definitely the point at which if you didn't think you needed headphones to listen to this, you definitely do now. 'Cause wow, it just surrounds you in this. This album is best listened to in the dark. It's It's split up into sections, which I very much enjoy, 'cause you have the plucking and the lone singing and the beating of the cloak, the fur clothing, and the wind that just picks back up. And it's not wind, but it's a whole lot of noise and chaos that just sort of builds and drowns out any sound, and then it peaks. And isn't that where all the like rapid pounding down sounds kick in?
I believe so.
Yes.
Yeah. There's the sound of just something like in the story it says it's the sound of snow being packed down on top of this woman.
Yes.
And this is... the story goes with it really well, but I think this is where the music really takes hold of the story in a way I don't personally feel like it did in the tracks before it, just because can you really start off with that?
Yeah. The little chanting towards the end too, like the really fasting, like chicka 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 chicka, that sort of thing, if that's at least what they're saying. It kind of gives you an idea because the delivery it kind of shows you like how usual is this for the old Inuits, because they don't sound like they're really sorrowful about it.
They don't sound like they're panicking.
No, not at all. It's pretty normal to them, and they've at least gotten to the point where they don't really seem to feel like sad about it, I guess. It's like because they're pretty enthusiastic with the chanting too.
Yeah, the chanting like for most of this album doesn't really take on any kind of like emotion.
Yeah. So it shows that whatever's kind of going around them, they're used to it very much.
Yeah, and she herself, as she's realizing that everybody around her thinks she's dead, which is, I think it's
terrifying. Very Twilight Zone-esque.
Yeah, terrifying and fascinating, because that's again the Residents showing a bit more nuance than is like at the base level in the depiction of these people. The snow's being packed down and she's thinking that she's dead and that everybody around her is singing a song of farewell. They walk you through death along with her, as her. Mm-hmm. And it's not this terrible, depressing thing. It's really, more than anything, it's chaotic. It's chaotic and a little catatonic. And then, as it says in the story, things clear up.
She comes to, and she just goes right back to doing what she was doing, as if nothing ever happened.
Yeah, chanting to release her from the spell of Arctic hysteria, and then she just goes on about her day. I mean, or her night, her,
whatever.
Her awake period.
Yeah, her 6-month-long night awake edition.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just, the whole, hey, this whole happened. Back to business.
Yeah. It be like that sometimes.
So, yeah, it really do be like that out here sometimes. But we live in a society. So it's almost like this isn't the first time this has happened to the...
Quote from the Residents, not only do we live in a society, but they do too.
We all live in a society in this world, even the people on the ice.
Oh, gosh. Mind blown.
It really do be like that sometimes. I mean, we don't think it do be like it is, but it do.
Wow.
But that musical loneliness that's at the beginning, the musical loneliness is resolved by the fact that when the people come in, it turns out she lives in a society. It's a very interesting contrast, because as everybody that apparently is around her realizes that she's going into this trance, they're on it like that, and then they start chanting on the dot just to get her out of it. And suddenly, like, from an audio perspective, you're just surrounded by this noise and this chanting and the sound of rescue effort.
Yeah, it's like the music itself. It's like putting you through the hysteria yourself. Like, I mean, like, I guess we were never really given much detail on the audible part of the hysteria. So it could be that whole really mess of sound, the really high-pitched ringing at one point. It's just like that's part of the hysteria. So maybe it's putting
panic attack.
Yeah, exactly. It's like kind of you're screwed audibly. It's like destroying your ears kind of thing.
Yeah, I know for me, the sound of it all makes me feel kind of claustrophobic.
It's very chaotic.
Yeah, and then she gets out of it. She looks at the Northern Lights playing her instrument, and she's thinking, we live in a society.
We live in a society.
Bottom text.
Bottom text. When you go to the land of the crestfallen, bottom text.
So it be like bottom text.
So basically, I'm dead.
So basically, I'm Inuit, bottom text.
There's a good chunk of people listening to this who have no idea what's going on right now.
Kids these days.
They're like, what the hell are these youths talking about?
I'm talking about society that they do live in the Inuit
talking about
culture.
Society, Dad. I have a small correction to make. Earlier I said it was the woman herself who was playing the kua, and it's not. It's somebody in the distance. But I think that even the fact that somebody else is playing it, that adds to that loneliness. Because it all sounds so far away, and
the person playing it, because it's so far away, it doesn't feel like a person almost. It's just this ambient sound.
Which, like, shout out to Inuit cultures for coming up with ambient music.
There you have it.
I like to think that the woman like started like having these like symptoms of the hysteria, and the person playing the instrument came and was like, "No!" and they like smashed her over the head with it. It's like, "Stop! You'll be okay.
You'll be okay. You're not dead."
That's what all the noise is. The ringing in the ears is from being hit in the head.
Got little birds or little walruses flying around her head.
Aww.
Yeah, swimming around her head.
Penguins.
Little dogs.
You know, the drum being far away reminds Anna Karenina, the Russian novel by Leo Tolstoy, in which, man, it's a huge spoiler.
You're the only person who's going to know what this is.
Come on, people have read Anna Karenina. It's like
I
extremely famous.
Well, I'm not Russian.
Classic.
I don't know this stuff.
Well, I'm not Russian either.
Just tell what is the reference?
Well, I don't want to. All right,
say it and we'll edit it out.
Anna Karenina spoilers ahead for those of you who care about me spoiling this several 100-year-old book. You know, Anna Karenina, the titular character, goes through all this. Like, she more or less she cheats on her husband and she's ostracized by her community. So at the end of the book, she does live in a society, one that does not like her after she cheats on her husband. In any case, she ends up killing herself, and she is, for whatever reason, is like obsessed with this man who's working on the railroad and just like muttering to himself and clanking away on the railroad. And it's very similar, that kind of sensation of loneliness and nobody knows I'm here and I'm going to die and nobody's going to notice, or I've died and nobody knows where I've gone, and this kind of idea that people around you, despite the fact that they're around you, could increase that sensation of loneliness, if that makes sense. I'm speaking gobbledygook, but that's fine.
I think that makes plenty of sense. That's very poignant.
Yeah, I get what you mean, because like, the whole singing, like, and then there's no, like, the person playing the instrument doesn't exactly change it so to fit the singing. It just keeps playing it as it is.
Life goes on regardless of what's going to happen to this woman, or regardless of what's going to happen to Anna Karenina.
So I think we're just about done with Arctic Hysteria. Let's go on to The Angry Angakok.
I'm gonna go ahead and say that I like the really weird kind of electric buzzing noise in the beginning, because there's, you know, I listen to music other than The Residents. Surprise.
Loser.
Damn.
Traitors.
And, I know I've committed a sin. You can sacrifice me to the spirit now. But there's 9 Inch Nails is one of them. And they have this one song that I really like that begins with kind of that electric buzzing sound. It's a little more organized, but it reminds me kind of that. And then it loses all of the coherence, and then I'm just like, oh, this is the Residents.
Stop.
Wow.
Yeah, I believe the electric sounds you're talking about in the beginning are the supposed whales of the story.
Oh, those are some interesting whale sounds. Are they robo whales?
The like little beeps almost. Those like hums that are very high pitched.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure they're supposed to be whales. I really like that.
Yeah, I like that. I like the way that they turn the sounds of the whole environment into like that.
Yeah, the incorporation of sort of, residential electronic sounds and the more organic sounds of the acoustic instruments that are supposedly in there. It works really well.
Yeah, it's a really interesting sound that I think fits not only the tone of the album, but then also it makes it feel colder, but also just fits like the whole art style they're going for. Like even if we go back to the cover art again, like the very pointy like glacial mountain things.
Yeah.
Kind of
look like audio waves.
Like it's very reflective of that electronic sound.
Yeah, because I actually, now that I look at it, I get what you mean, because it's like they look really artificial.
Exactly, and there's that minimalism there in the electronic sound, especially.
Yeah, because it is kind of a basic electronic sound.
Yeah, the way they have that kind of like artificial depiction of these things. Because on the album art, it sort of looks like what you'd see on the interior of like an Inuit-themed tilt-a-whirl at a fair,
Which is like in line with this whole thing, this whole motif, I suppose, of an outsider's perspective and this whole Western perspective of a culture that isn't theirs. It's so we or they or whoever you want to say, whatever pronoun or whatever you want to use, has created an artificial perception, artificial reality for this actual thing that's gone on. Does that make sense?
No,
so,
absolutely.
Like, in using like these artificial sounds to represent natural things, it's kind of emblematic of this whole, you know.
Yes, I do know. That is, I hadn't thought of that, and that's really on the nose. Wow.
They did the same thing in Animal Lover too, because they which was like 26 years after this. Where they like
do you think we can do math?
I can't count.
I can't. I'm just taking a wild guess. I'm guessing Animal Lover came 1,000 years after this one.
That seems about accurate.
Hell yeah! But it's like they use like guitars and stuff, like really droning guitars to make like almost a whale sound and that kind of thing.
Whale, W-A-I-L?
No, I mean like the kind of what I mean is like that like that kind of sound.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
They
like your
were,
whale
yeah. Thank you. I do whale impressions for a living. Come see me on stand up. But
so do you do whale impressions or comedy?
I do comedy about whales.
Comedy for whales.
And for whales, yeah, so they can understand me. I just basically sit on a stage for half an hour going.
I might actually watch that.
I think that's what the Residents are doing here. They're trying to
that's probably what they wanted for this opera if they ever made it. So
yeah, it was just going to be stand-up comedy by and for whales, except it's not actually by whales, but the whales in the audience don't know because they're in the water. So
shout out to all the whales.
Shout out to the whales in the UK. I'm sorry you guys didn't get to see the Resident.
I'm gonna throw you in the ocean. So let's. And speaking of throwing people in the ocean,
the story.
Yeah, the music and the story. So after that whole electronic buzzing bit, it's kind of a jaunty tune, if I do say so myself.
Their chanting is very catchy, but it's very silly sounding because it's.
That's it.
And it's all serving a purpose. I think that's another thing that they're pointing out here is that everything they do has some kind of utility, which plays into the othering factor. It's like they're not just singing and chanting for fun like real cultures do. They're trying to get the ice floe to break off so that they can get some food. They're hungry. I get that. I respect that. And so, this one, I think, is the one, like, with the most personal, not being, like, personal to the residents, but individuals start to actually stand out culturally here. The story development, wig, you know, because you've got everybody chanting and the Angakok doing his magic, you know, waving his Inuit wand around or whatever, to try and get this ice to break, and then some irreverent little turd hunter pulls up on the spot, and it's like, oh, what do you think you're doing? Your magic? It's trash. And I think that is both very fun and relatable.
Yeah, they're saying necky, necky, necky.
Yeah, but of course the story doesn't end there, because that would make a pretty bad ending. But, you know, the chanting is...
A rap battle between an Anganok and a hunter. Or an Angakok and a hunter.
Yeah, that's basically what it is. And
Never
you've
thought
got
of it that way.
you've got the crowd chanting their taunt of necky, necky, necky. And I sort of like the way... I like it. The way they're representing the culture. It's very exciting, and once again, they're getting you, the listener, involved in the culture. And this is something that I think probably, like, this is just WWE. That's all this is.
Hunter versus Angakok.
Yeah, that's their names. And the reason you can't see me is not because my time is now, but because there's a whiteout. So, yeah, the role of chanting and magic in all of this is sort of delightfully prominent. You know, they really flesh that out. Because the Angakok is like, say those words to me again. And the hunter says those words to him again. And then the Angakok, like, as I guess just... Well, they describe it as a giant snake which stands on the water. What it sounds like is some kind of, I don't know, like, ice twister? Some kind of some ice tornado? I don't know.
Basically, he summoned a whole entire snowstorm.
Yeah, I forgot that snow was a thing that happened there. I'm no better than the residents.
It's raining ice, that's terrible.
And then that whole ice storm snake thing breaks off the ice, and then as it passes by and goes away, the hunter is gone. Like, that's wild.
I love it.
He said, "Be gone, thought."
He basically, like, looked into the eyes of the hunter. He said, "Say those words to me again, you little necky." And then he said him again, and then he just managed to smite him using his finger.
Yeah, it's very biblical.
My
very
boy Thanos.
Old Testament. Oh my god.
He snapped his fingers, and then the guy just withered away.
I don't feel so good, Mr. Angakok.
Angakok, I think I have a stare. And then they died.
Interestingly, when I was listening to this again last night in the dark, alone, when the wind part kicked in, for the first time in listening to it and listening to that track, I really felt it. I was really in it. I don't know what the difference was this time, but I could never really visualize what was going on with this giant snake which stands on the water thing. Then it just sort of made sense, and I wasn't even reading the story at the time. And so, I think that's just a testament to the effectiveness of the audio storytelling here.
I like how this story is basically the only one that has, like, it's very explicit in its magical qualities.
Yeah, because it's like, this guy is basically the god of these people, and he just summoned a storm and killed a hunter.
As one does. Don't you wish you could do that? Like, somebody, like, talk smack, and you're just like, say it again. And they say it again, you're just like, watch this, you are like a little baby.
Yeah, just, watch this. And I snap my fingers, and they just... This whole snowstorm comes out and takes them away.
Kat, what this reminds me of is the sort of thing you were mentioning with the colonialism thing. It was noted in a lot of texts from transcriptions of legends from really various Native American tribes in the United States, before they were the United States, and even after. When these colonizers came in with Christianity, that actually shifted how their stories were told, because in a lot of these stories before that, there were not really, for some of them, there weren't really singular gods beforehand. It was just sort of like anthropomorphized forces of nature and like trickster spirits and stuff like that. But then after the introduction of Western cultures, the idea of a singular deity became incorporated into those stories. And maybe it's intentional, maybe it's not, but I see a lot of that here, right? Because the Angakok, despite being, just a magic man, which is still quite a... He's a magic man, just even though he is already that, a magic man has sort of different powers than a god does. But here he's channeling this like Old Testament god kind of rage here.
Are we doing Wormwood?
Patience, child. Patience.
Eskimo Part 2, Wormwood.
Subtitle, you figure it out. And you see, that's what I think is really fascinating here, is that you get the whole thing where the residents are reflecting on the Western cultures examining this other and enforcing their own concepts into it.
Again, not only a not understanding, but an unwillingness to understand in favor of preserving this mysticism, this idea of what you want it to be to make it sound more cool or more, wow, look at this, and wow, and more quote-unquote savage.
Yeah, I think it speaks to a lot of like Judeo-Christian ideas of how the divine should be interacted with by really everybody else, because it's describing how everybody's running away from this giant snake and watching in fear and hysterically running for safety, and how it's like basically divine wrath. That's pretty legit, and that kind of storytelling speaks, I think, pretty powerfully to people who have already those kinds of concepts about singular deities and the force of their rage and whatnot.
I like how even in the story, the magic that the Angakok uses, it's just described as, quote, a giant snake which stands on water, which it adds to that sort of detachment that the entire album has, because it's very primitive the way they describe it compared to the way they describe pretty much everything else in the album.
Yeah, because it's like a fully not understood thing.
Yeah.
They could have described it better, but they didn't, because it's this weird thing that the other culture believes in that we, of course, don't.
Yeah, they've just channeled it, and nobody really knows how they did it or what it was, but it did all of these things because them, through their primitive views of the world and of magic and of God, have access to a different part that we can't. Ooh.
They even put the quotes on there. They're like, well, best way we have to describe it, giant snake, it stands on the water.
We know because we asked them.
we put it in quotes because they said it was a giant snake and it stands on the water, so that's what we say. We think it be like it does, but they think do.
Okay.
So let's move on to yeah.
I hate this one for one reason.
What's that? It woke you up? Was this one that woke you up?
No, that was Birth. This is the one with the doggy.
Oh, poor doggy. I wish this would happen to my stupid dogs. Just kidding, I love them.
No! I'll take your dog if you say that.
No, they're good. Cody's good. Molly sucks. You can have Molly.
Hey, wait, no, there's a real person named that. You can't say that.
No, Molly.
Oh, no.
Yeah, Molly's a good person.
Not her. I'm talking about my dog. Don't do nothing to human Molly. We love you, human Molly.
We love you, human Molly. So that goes out to every human named Molly out there.
Yep, every single one of them.
Yeah, everyone else, if you're not named Molly, you can go screw yourself. But
we really can't be bothered with you.
Who do you think you are if your name's not Molly? Like, what do you think you're doing?
What's the point?
What's the point? In fact, we here at Homage Conversations are all in the process of legally changing our names to Molly. So
I've already gotten my middle name changed to Molly.
So soon it'll just be Molly, Molly, Molly.
Exactly. But
so let's actually talk about this. Okay, so I honestly, even though this one has, the uncomfortable doggy part, I like it starts out again with another jovial tune, and they're just chilling. I mean, the story says otherwise, but it's kind of it's just a regular celebration as opposed to all the other ones we've seen. Well, regular enough.
It's a celebration just as any other holiday.
Yeah, it's basically a holiday.
They're just like laying down some really sick jams with their instruments and.
Because hunting season was bomb. And the chanting is kind of like it's less structured. You get people just kind of like ah! And then they go back to playing all their instruments.
Because they just going ham. They're just happy as clams.
But yeah, the very bassy, fish. The very bassy kind of drums happening. It's not super panicked. We're just chilling. Shout out to hunting season. We're doing great. But then they use the wind as kind of like a little like
an omen of sorts.
Yeah, the wind is a very creepy thing here. Shout out to them and their wind sound replicating abilities. I don't know how they did that. They
did that with a synth, didn't they?
Maybe.
I mean, it had to be like a white noise machine or something.
But yeah, you have this very jovial scene, and then in comes the wind, so it's about to go down.
And then you start hearing a child crying.
You know what? I'll say it right here and now. This must have been inspired by when the residents were in Safeway taking pictures. They probably saw an unattended child, and they said, "Ah, I see now." I also like how the story itself, it gives you that bit of foreshadowing before the wind does, because it talks about the disappearance of children. And if you're reading this along with the music, you're like, this is, okay, thanks, I guess, for mentioning the disappearance of children.
Like, the name of the song is "A Spirit Steals a Child," and then the music starts to fade out, and you hear a child crying. I'm pretty sure that.
Yeah.
You're like, gee, I wonder what's about to happen here.
Yeah, but, because you see the track title, and then the quick description of the half-seal, half-woman spirit. The spirit of the weeping seal, who steals children that she sees are left unguarded. And so you're like, oh, okay. That's what this is going to be like. And then you get these people tapping away on their drums, having a grand old time.
They have that, marimba instrument that's amazing.
Yeah, I have to imagine, a bunch of cartoon cats in an alley. They're playing it on, skeletons.
Exactly. That's what I was just about to say. It's it reminds me of, a cartoon skeleton.
So in the instruments of the ceremonial band, it actually calls this instrument the sedrak, which is a tuned percussive instrument made of walrus and whale ribs, which are struck with the bones of frozen fish. Okay.
Well, there you have it.
Okay.
Well, they did a good job replicating that sound.
Yeah, like a full skeleton of one of those animals is tapping its ribs.
Yeah. So, but then, you realize what's going on, and the wind starts spinning, and then you hear this kid crying, which, oh man, they're such effective storytellers.
Yeah, you're not in the little safe place that they're playing all the music in. You're now behind an igloo.
Yeah, you are the child. Congratulations. And then the wind starts to get pitched. It takes on a musical quality, which it really doesn't do so much in the previous tracks, except for maybe on Arctic Hysteria. This time, it's got, body to it. Probably because, in some way or another, it's representing the weeping seal's arrival. Yeah.
The image I get in my mind is, these, spirits in the air. The wind itself is almost a spirit in this exact part of the song.
I like to think the spirits are actually just the residents in their eyeball costumes. Come on, we're going to lead you back to safety.
Just stealing kids left and right.
Yeah, they're bringing them, we need you for Goosebump, come on.
Oh, man, Goosebumps. And so the wind picks up, and it gets all spooky and scary, and if you have your headphones on, you're like, oh, God, I'm gonna die. I'm going to get stolen away by the spirit of the weeping seal. That's gonna be it for me. But then they bring back this social element that they also had in Arctic Hysteria. This album is very well balanced.
And Birth, right? We were talking about that being Birth as well? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's all it's everywhere in this album.
I am the wind. I like to think that the kind of repeating themes is kind of like the chorus of a song. It just keeps coming back repeatedly.
Spins me right round like a record, baby.
Well, in that case, that's like every single
spirit,
part of the song
baby.
is the same.
Like a great snake that stands on the water, baby. But one of the people from the party just going down notices that a child is gone, which is a problem, and so they're like on top of it. Their accustomation, I think that's a word, to how the world around them works in all of its magical, natural complexities. In an instant, this person starts, freaking out and runs back, and it's like, hey, y'all, baby gone. Yeah, and the Angakok on it, as always, starts chanting, and then, once again, there's so much drama in it. It is like a nature documentary, because even though that slows the spirit, everybody's got to get it together and go get this child. And so, I guess it's time to address the doggy part, because dog sleds, it's difficult. If you like dogs and you don't like hearing about bad things happening to fictional dogs, voice acted by the residents, this is a good time to cover your ears. Uncover them eventually.
You know what? I'll just bite the bullet and I'll just start describing myself here. So part of their little ceremony is decapitating a dog,
so that the child's spirit can be brought back.
Yes.
By said pooch.
So what they do is, the Angakok speaks his little spell, and then they bring a dog to him, and they decapitate the dog. And, they do their little ceremony, and then the dogs are howling because they, smell the blood of their own kind.
Yeah, and supposedly how it's supposed to work is that this sacrifice... Well, once again, this theme of that sacrifice. I mean, what's more dead, a child or a dog? Vote on your phones now. Supposedly, this dog head is supposed to get the weeping seal spirit to return the stolen child. And
it's kind of like bite him, Fido.
Yeah. So this is also this also shows up in birth, because it doesn't specifically tell you if it did anything. The story ends on kind of a mysterious note, speaking of how the spirits are intertwining in the air, and the men return to the village, waiting to see, hey, did it work?
They just said they're in hopes that the child was there.
I love how it ends like that. It's so good.
I remember when I was listening to this and
it's melancholy.
Yes, because there's so many things dying and going missing that.
And there's still that hope, but there's this vague sense, this looming sense of there's like a 50-50 chance it could go amazingly or it could go terribly.
I remember when I first listened to it too, and towards the end, the Angakok, he kind of gets like this, it almost sounds like he's kind of panicked.
Yeah.
So I was always when I first listened to it, I thought like is someone trying to kill him? And because there is part of it in the little random little information that you can get. They did mention something about what happens when an Angakok is murdered. So I thought maybe that's kind of what happened. I thought someone realized, hey, he has too much power, and then they tried to kill him. But no, that's not what happened.
Yeah, I can see how that would be a conclusion that you'd come to. But yeah, with the whole thing where he sounds kind of panicked, I think that's really, really another time where they're being very humanizing. Because even though on tracks like Birth, they're sort of depicting these people as having very strange opinions surrounding children and the birth of children and all sorts of ritual things surrounding that, it's still the importance of protecting these children and making sure that they are not left unattended and are not stolen away.
Yeah, that was one of their rules, is don't leave children unattended.
Yeah, I think that's pretty important there. And then as, the Angakok's voice gets more and more panicked, they, once again, humanize or anthropomorphize the wind as the weeping seal spirit, and it gets that musical kind of tone. So when it gets musical wind, that's that weeping seal spirit.
Yeah, so basically the Angakok is arguing with a spirit.
I know she stole a child.
Give me the child! And then the wind is like talking to him, saying, I don't have a child. And he's yelling back, give me the child!
You have a child right behind you.
Where is she?
Where is
Batman?
Batman? Yeah, it's like the Angakok. He puts on like his Batman hood, and he like grabs the spirit by the shoulder. He's like shaking him. He's like, where is she? Or no, where is he? Because it's a boy.
Yeah. So, good track. Very good track.
I like how this one is, in my opinion, the most story-y.
Oh yeah.
Of the stories. It's like a complete, besides the ending, but it's a very complete story. It reminds me a lot of Loss of Innocence from the commercial album. How it's this entire snapshot of a whole narrative almost, but it's still vague and weird.
Yeah, they use sound really effectively. I think it has to do with the theory of phonetic organization. They're building the music and all that out of the sounds of people and the sounds of dogs and the sound of like the wind speaking to the Angakok.
I always like that way. Like overall, the story of this, and in a couple things like Loss of Innocence. It's like you don't get much context beyond what you would have seen if you were there. So
yeah,
and it's just like real life. It's like when you're hearing all this or seeing all of it, it's like you don't know like what the hell is this guy cutting a dog's head off for? I feel nasty saying that, but like then you read the text and it's like this is a ritual they do.
And this is something that I can look at and say, okay, well, yeah, if this is your ritual for getting children back from spirits, then totally, that's what you do.
Yeah, because they never say, like, hey, this is a ritual they have in the song. It's all like if you jump in there without reading a little bit of history on their on the Inuits, well, you're going to be in for a hell of a ride because you're not going to know what is happening.
Definitely confusing. Yeah,
it's also interesting to me, at least when I was reading that the idea of like the weeping seal woman. And how she's upset that she can't have any kids, so she kidnaps other people's children. Because we see that kind of spirit a lot in, like, basically every culture. Like, there's one in Japan, whose name I forget, where she, like, cries and she tries to get a baby or tries to lead you to her baby. That could be two different spirits, I can't remember. We have the woman in white in America, and Mexico has La Llorona, which is also very similar. She goes around crying and she's like, where's my babies? So I also find it interesting that they've incorporated, or whoever has incorporated this idea. We are the residents. We are
all residents.
We are the world. We are the children.
Okay, so to cut that short, because if I have to hear anything about We Are the World at 9 p.m. on a Tuesday night, I'm gonna lose it. Let's move on to the last track.
So the Festival of Death is really the most song-like song in this entire album.
Full of songs, supposedly.
We think it might be a song, but we don't know.
It's pretty musical. I'll agree with that. It is very musical in parts. It definitely has the feeling of the end of an album.
A finale of sorts.
Yeah, it feels like a mean trick that they're playing where you think the album is over, but oh no, there's time left. So you deal with that one.
Yeah, you hear the wind and you think like, oh, maybe this is just a close, or maybe this is a bit of ambient, and then
very like tragic low horn, almost like the sound of distant bells chiming.
Yeah, those. I was gonna say, like, then you hear those and you realize, you still got one more ride to go.
And there's like the distant chanting.
I like to think it's almost like there's two ways it could be taken, because the whole thing, it rises in volume and you can start hearing the chants more and more. So I like to think there's one of two possibilities: you are arriving at the Festival of Death, or you are one of the spirits that are meant to be coming to the festival.
Ooh, ho, ho, ho. Oh man, yes, galaxy brained. But yeah, Miwi, you are totally correct in saying that this one is probably like off the bat more musical, because it's got a deep electronic kind of jaunty tune going on at a very low range as the music builds up. It just explores so many different kinds of sound, I guess. And I think another part that I really like is like the clacking, the clicky-clacky sound of the percussion. Yeah, but this one gets more electronic, and in a way, as a major festival in this imaginary mostly imaginary culture, imaginary in the way they're depicting it, as this is the biggest event that they've got, there's this added bit of, even more so than usual, this added bit of mysticism surrounding it to convey to an audience that doesn't know really why it matters. The insertion of these familiar things to make an unfamiliar thing comprehensible at the price of truth. Yeah, I don't think we can really discuss more of the music without getting into the story.
I just like to think you can tell where the tonal shift of the festival changes, because in the story, at first, they're all wearing their masks and they're celebrating this death thing, and then the people run out, and then it changes out, and it switches to this.
It's more festive.
Yeah, a lot more happy-ish, despite everything that's already happened before this. You can tell where that shift is, because in the beginning you have all of these beats and stuff, and it sounds really spooky, all the whistles, and then towards the end, it turns into this nicer upbeat.
I think this one is another one where you have to read along to get what's going on, even though the tone is communicated, because the story is really something else, and dare I say it, it's spookier than the music itself. Mm-hmm. The way it describes a face as tall as a man, a big round evil face wandered at random, and once again this presence of the dead, which is a way for them, I think, probably to communicate the otherness. It's the dead are they're not just ghosts. They're tangible. They have an effect, yeah, and in a way they are deities of their own because they need to be fought off in their own kind of way, where they can, they say they stole the sun. In Western culture, it's ghosts just kind of hang around being ectoplasmic idiots knocking chairs over.
If you're Slimer, you'll destroy a ballroom and Bill Murray comes. That's a whole ordeal.
Yeah. And in Western culture, when you're dead, you're pretty much just dead. You don't get any really extra powers, and in fact, you lose, for the most part, the ability to communicate in your own way with the living. But here, the dead, in their being dead, with the presence of other animal spirits being mentioned before, one, it's not just humans, so no, all dogs do not go to heaven. Sometimes they turn into epic ghosts. But two, a lot of these spirits, they have kind of a power, almost like they're deities. And I think that's really very neat.
Yeah, it's just in short, in Western stuff, it's ooh, spooky, they're hanging around, they're showing up in my mirrors, the mirror people. And up in the Arctic, they're stealing the sun.
So, if you're not in the Arctic, you need to step up your game, spirits.
Yeah, it's that they used to be so spooky, they used to be such, crazy things, in the medieval times, and now they're just...
Well, the ghosts in, Japan, they have some crazy ghosts in Japan.
Basically, Judeo-Christian ghosts are a lot lamer.
Yeah, back in medieval times, you all those spooky, they're demons. They're, hanging out in our houses.
And they dance alone.
They dance alone. And they're playing trumpets, and they're holding eyeballs, and
They're not even good at playing the trumpet.
Yeah, it sounds like MIDI.
These spirits are not evil, which I think that is so... Ah, man, that is so fascinating. The fact that these spirits are not necessarily evil. This is just a part of the routine.
Yeah,
this is how they behave. And what's even more is that even though it's like the Angakok who does all the cool magic and the hunters and the men who make, who sort of operate on the day-to-day basis, at these key points, it's feminism. It's the women of the tribe.
Yes, queens.
We stand legends. Wig. They're the ones who are literally asking the dead to return the sun.
More so demanding. They're just like, hey, get out of here.
Yeah, you get on out of here. The women of the tribe interact with the music, and the music has this relation to spirituality that I think is very neato, because what is chanting without some backup guitar and drums, baby?
Hell yeah.
And that's that helps make the song that keeps the world going round for them. And then the men, once the sun has been returned, they take off their dead spirit masks and stop trying to blend in with them, and then the festive songs begin, and oh man, okay, we got here. The festive songs.
Is it time?
Yeah, it is time.
It is time.
Time to take out my delicious, refreshing Coca-Cola.
Hell yeah.
I already finished mine. I was trying to add life with all that death that was going on.
Aw.
I don't drink Coca-Cola that often, I'm sorry, but it tastes like lime. And so, yeah, for the unaware, because I don't know how we could expect you to be aware, unless, you already... Yeah, that a part of the chants, this is where the incorporation of brands and slogans really kicks it into high gear, because they start chanting, like, please don't squeeze the Charmin, and probably some other things, and for a little bit, but then... It shifts and it builds as they repeat, Coca-Cola adds life, and the instruments join in more and more, and then it peaks with we want Coke, oh yeah.
We want Coke, oh yeah.
And then just there's this breakdown, the beat drops, everybody's like dabbing and doing dances left and right. Doing the stanky leg in the Arctic, slipping all around on the ice, doing the Superman, that O.
Now they've got tank tops and sandals with socks on.
They're on island time, baby.
And like flipped and like hats off to the side.
Can I just say, and I know I've said this before, but Coca-Cola, it does add life. I don't know.
Can I add a really horrifying image into everybody's head?
No, I guess.
So, as they're doing their business and stuff, one of the Eskimos takes out a vape and they rip a fat rip.
That's what the Angakok was doing.
Yeah, that's what he did when he was arguing with that hunter. He just took out a vape and blew it in his face and he just died.
He blew the sickest vape cloud known to man.
It was like one of those huge boxes and he just exhales all of it out and it causes a huge snowstorm.
Oh man. God, I can't wait for that to be cut out. Nobody deserves to hear that.
Nope.
So, yeah, they're all very grateful for the spirits having gone away, and then so they start chanting about the brands and whatnot. Then it really puts some jingles in a different light, because they're catchy, and the words that are used in these jingles are made to be catchy. And so the residents take that and use it under the theory of phonetic organization because it sounds good. And they're using those words as sound. So those become a part of the percussion just as much as the drums are. And yeah, I think that is very effective. And there's this relationship between the Inuit culture and their environment where even though all of the things we've heard and read about, even though those things occur seemingly fairly regularly, there's no attempt on the part of the Inuit culture to destroy nature, and that's othering, because if you really want to live up to those Western values, you have to look nature in the eye when it's doing absolutely nothing and say, this has to go.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it says gratefully the dead had released their hold once more. It's open-ended, it's not saying the dead are defeated forever and they've been sent away and they'll never take the sun back. It just said, for now.
Much like everything else, we're very open-ended.
Yeah.
No answers, so to speak.
Yeah. So, yeah, I guess that's it, right, for that one?
I think so.
Festival of Death?
Yep.
I think so, yeah.
It feels like there's just so much to say, but then there's, what is there to say? It's, all just, wow.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? You can't really articulate it.
Unlike a lot of their storyteller albums that came later, much later, this one really, it's kind of just using sound to create and to create these little stages, and you listen to them and you can read along, but because there's no lyrics, really all there is to do is to describe the sound if you're not actually listening to it. So this is our little hat tip to the residents and our hat tip to you, saying, hey, go listen to it. Because,
go listen to it.
Yeah, I think it speaks for
you
itself.
You have to.
It's essential residence.
It's essential, not only, but it's
all
just
residence is essential residence.
Oh, yeah.
Well,
buy it and listen to it in any form, whether you have to go and fork over several $100s for a first pressing or buy the MVD without all the cool stuff. Picture disc, even, for God's sake. Download it. Buy the preserved edition coming out of it soon. Whatever Cherry said about some vinyl thing.
It's as good of a job as I feel we are doing, or at least I hope that we're doing, and I hope everybody agrees. Anyway, as good of a job as I hope we are doing, it's just with this particular album, you've got to experience it, people.
Headphones, in the dark, with a blanket.
With a blanket.
What a better time to experience it than now, because it's being re-released in 4 different ways.
And it's cold as hell.
And it's cold,
unless you live in somewhere like Arizona. Lives in Arizona.
It's cold for Arizona.
Tell me what the temperature it is right now.
It's 50 degrees Fahrenheit.
Holy.
Yeah, which is 50 degrees here. So since we're so eager to talk about the preserved stuff, let's move on to the epilogue, which I think is, it's funny as much as it's tragic, and I will read it now.
Do it. Go.
All the stories on this recording are expressed in the past tense. This is because the Eskimo, particularly the polar Eskimo on which this album is based, was rescued from its miserable lifestyle by welfare in the late 60s. The polar Eskimo has been relocated entirely into government housing and now spends most of the day watching reruns on TV. So, we've saved them. Western culture saved them with the power of Charmin and Coke. And all that, we have made them safe from the horrors of the world out there and the terrifying relationship they had with nature where, for some reason, they never wanted to really destroy it. No, instead we've put them inside. And now
they get to watch TV.
They can watch TV like the rest of us civilized people.
You know what they want? Coke.
Oh yeah! Jeez. So... overall,
Man,
what do we think of this album?
I see why so many people like it, but I'm not it's really, really in depth. It really goes hard on the subject matter, but I'm just afraid I wouldn't listen to this that much.
I don't think I can listen to this one on the regular because it's not a background noise album when experienced fully. The Residents rarely do background music albums, but this one in particular, it's if you're not gonna listen to it all the way, why listen to it at all? You either skate or you die.
Yeah, this one's a tough one to listen to. I think I've listened to it maybe 3 times in the last 2 years. if even that. But every time I listen to it, it's so good. And a lot of people describe this as one of the Residents' masterpieces. I have to agree.
From a quality standpoint, yeah, and storytelling standpoint, it's just in terms of, average listening time, I don't even see it as one of the highest. But from everything
that's because
else,
they just make really good stuff.
Yeah. I mean, of course it wasn't exactly, nice to oh yeah, I'm going to play this on the radio, I'm going to listen to this and enthusiastically jog.
Yeah, I'm not going to slam Eskimo into my car CD player and drive along to it on the freeway.
But what it did manage to do when it came out was get nominated for a Grammy.
So let's talk about that. I think it was for the 1980 Grammys, right?
I believe so, because it came out. It came
in '79.
Yeah, it came out in late '79, so I think it missed the '79 Grammys, so '80.
Yeah. So it didn't get fully nominated, but it got through the pre-nomination process, and the Residents were invited to the Grammys, and they sat next to disco legend Donna Summers.
Holy crap. That's fantastic.
And perhaps related, perhaps unrelated, they did put out an album of sorts titled Eskimo, because disco will never die. Until it did.
Single, you mean?
Oh, was it a single?
Yeah, it was a single, and then they had the EP of Goosebump to go with it.
Ah, I see.
It was kind of like, two sides of the record, except they weren't related.
Yeah. So, yeah, Disco Will Never Die. And Eskimo is a weird piece of work. And then there were other ideas for what to do with this album, because they wanted to do an Eskimo opera, which was the whole album told on top of glaciers, giant glaciers. But yeah, as it often goes, things didn't quite work out.
Back then, any of their plans for doing anything beyond just an album was basically failure. They especially the movie thing, because they tried that so early they didn't even sell anything at that point. They just started making it after they sent or around the time they sent out a little Christmas gift.
Speaking of movies, they did put out an Eskimo DVD.
Yeah, they did, and it's interesting.
Yeah, I'm not I've seen little bits of it. I'm not sure if I know how to feel about this, but
it's bizarre. I will say that it is definitely bizarre, but I mean, if you're having trouble with just sound and reading, then I think listening to it while watching the DVD is probably going to do you some good, but it's got some very strange imagery, who's really to say... Yeah.
It was kind of a given from the time it was made. I mean, the 2000s, the early... That's when it came out, right? Early 2000s?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was around, they were still in their, icky flicks. Really, weird and gross kind of
Yeah,
style.
Experimenting with the DVD format as an art platform of its own.
Yeah.
So it was an interesting little stint, but...
Yeah, a lot of their visual art around that time was gross, so that being said, Eskimo...
Hey, you shut up. It's nice.
It's nice, but I really love it. I actually think that's one of their best art times, but I still have to admit it was pretty kind of yucky looking. That's why they call it icky flicks, I think.
All right, I'll let you have that one. So I guess
I mean, what I'm just saying is they'll be holding some really gross amalgamation of some flesh stuff, and it just turns into a face just pops out of it, and it's what is this?
Yeah, things got kind of weird there. Okay, so I think we should move on to the afterword. So, we have arrived in the afterword, because we really pretty much wrapped up with the album. So, it's time to move on to a little bit of news stuff. So,
if you're here for Eskimo, you should probably leave now.
No, you shouldn't leave. You should probably just stay because you love us.
And we love you. Okay, so recent past in terms of news stuff, we had the City Lights reading, which featured some musical improv, which was that was on Halloween. The Litquake performance, which allegedly was in October, which featured excerpts from Brick Eaters also, and as well as some portions of their In Between Dreams performance, so that was something. And
I'm so happy they included Die, Die, Die.
It was very nice.
So good.
That was the best performance, too, because he actually stepped out in the audience.
Oh, creepy. In terms of recent releases, there was Intruders, which I'm actually sure was in October.
It was October 19th.
Yeah, Intruders, which is all sort of about doppelgangers and intruders in our minds and stuff. It's
about
wacky stuff.
Think, here's an example. It's like, think of someone that was sticking in your mind long after, like, they went away or something like that. It's basically that.
It's basically that. Songs about that. Songs by those things. You listen to it, you figure it out.
And maybe even formulate your own intruders. Maybe the band becomes your intruders. Maybe you're thinking, like, well, these guys can't get out of my head.
I think the residents are my intruders. So the Brick Eaters, as I mentioned before, that is a novel they put out on July 10th. And it is extremely good. And I'm not saying that just because it partially takes place in my current location to an extent. It's a good book. You should buy it and you should read it. It's a very strange little tale. So that's in the past. But what's in the future? When everyone lives in the future, the present is au revoir. Upcoming, we have In Between Dreams for a little bit in Europe in January and February of 2019. So if you're over there across that big old body of water we call the Atlantic Ocean, maybe start thinking about that, rubbing your chin about it, looking out your window about it, buying tickets about it, seeing the residents about it.
If you live in America, maybe
cry.
Maybe look up some flights to Europe.
UK. You couldn't see them in the Wales, but now you can see them 5 times in London.
The Wales.
Sorry, Wales. Hi, Wales.
So, there's some Cherry Red releases that are happening. They're cooking up many a thing, not only Eskimo, which is supposedly slated for a release maybe in January. At this point, who can really... Hello, and apologies for the interruption. So here, we were talking about upcoming Cherry Red releases. At the time of recording, the actual pre-order pages for the preserved releases of Eskimo and the commercial album had not been announced. They weren't there. But now, they are. So, little correction, Eskimo and the commercial album both have preserved releases available for pre-order, and those are going to come out, I believe, on January 25th, 2019. That's all. Thank you. Edition, which is from a lot of their from their archive. These are fresh and clean, squeaky. Yeah, and they come with little extra. They come with little extra CDs full of all sorts of strange music from those tapes and whatnot. And so, not only is Eskimo getting a preserved release, but so is the commercial album. And sometime around the commercial album, sometime around Record Store Day, there's going to be a mail order release, It's an album.
It's okay. There's a mixture of things they're actually doing regarding that. They have mentioned they're doing a preserved set of pre-resident stuff, which is something to get excited about for those people who like to hear the just really, really just nasty beginnings.
Just dirt recordings.
Yeah.
We love you, residents.
Ensenada, you took part in those, so I respect you. And then there's also a Record Store Day release, which I don't think I want.
The Record Store Day release.
It involves
the Record Store.
Children.
No.
Wait. You're talking about
So
yeah, that's what's coming up over there.
A disclaimer: it has not explicitly been said it was They just said it's ungoogleable, so I'm like 90% sure that's what it is.
Yeah, we don't know for sure if it's the one ungoogleable release they've put out, but we're inclined to believe so. But only time will tell, and even then, it ain't saying much.
It could just be like something we don't know about, so you can't Google it. But it's probably.
It could also be one that, because remember last year, it was kind of spoiled because of the fact that you could just Google Warner Brothers album. And then they found like the listings for the Record Store Day.
Whoopsie doopsie, but this time it won't happen so much.
This time you can't, because if you look it up, you're going to get arrested.
Yeah, so that's that. And in terms of less sure things in the future. There's a lot of chatter and mystery surrounding a movie that the residents are making, which always spells disaster in the most delightful ways, but this one actually has like a lot of footage. So, as
Double
far as we
trouble.
know. Yeah, Double Trouble.
It's
violent fats, but what if this time it was Randy's son? And I'm sorry to all you new listeners who don't know who Randy is. He's a foul little man with a phallic nose. We'll get to that.
He's a man who got lost a little too much in his rock star lifestyle.
We miss you, Randy.
Now he has
We
no
love you,
lifestyle.
dude.
Whatever happened to Randy Rose?
So yeah, I mean that's going on. We can't really say for sure what's going on there yet, because do the residents even know? And there's talk about some mysterious sorts of releases coming out, something about a release called Dying Dog, maybe in 2019, maybe in 2034, who can really say for sure? And there's puppet shows that might happen.
Was it Dying Duck or was it Dog Stab?
It's Dying Dog.
Maybe.
Okay, we should...
Long farewell. We hope you enjoyed your stay. At least I hope you enjoyed your stay. I can't speak for these guys. They probably hoped you hated every second of it. I, as your sweetest and most beautiful host.
Gossip.
That too.
Dead people.
Dead people. I hope you've truly enjoyed every second.
We live in a society.
We do live in a society. I don't know if you've gathered that much. We haven't been that.
No, I was holding it in.
1, 2, 3, yeah!